Companies like Ubisoft are pushing out open world games left and right, and many of these open world games have started to feel soulless. They've started to feel cheap. It's just a map with the same thing everywhere and barely any life. There's no character to these open worlds. Then Elden Ring comes along in 2022 and revitalizes what was missing from the open world stuff for ages. And Elden Ring's world is absolutely phenomenal. From its visual quality to its playability, Elden Ring got the open world formula right. But what makes the open world of Elden Ring compared to that of, say, Assassin's Creed Valhalla so much better? What gives games like Skyrim an advantage where other games like Far Cry 6 did not have such an advantage? As far as open worlds come along, what makes them simply better than the rest? There just needs to be a reason. We've seen a phenomenon over the past couple of years in the gaming world where the idea of open world games has become a bit of an expectation with each new game that comes out. And it totally makes sense why. Open world games provide this somewhat illusionary feeling that you are completely in control of your surroundings, that the game world your character exists in is something that you must fully explore and engage with to the maximum extent. The idea of open world games is certainly not a new thing at all. As early as the mid-80s, games like Elite and The Legend of Zelda allowed for players to feel more immersed in their game world by offering up pure exploration. The Legend of Zelda did this even more intensely than Elite, offering a much more expansive world. Elite could be considered more of a proto-open world. In 1991, Hunter was one of the first to introduce 3D graphics into the open world formula. In 1998, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time provided a small but detailed world with 3D graphics. NPCs, weather, and more were featured. In its time, this was a revolutionary feat. In 2001, GTA 3 would implement 3D graphics and emphasized its realistic open world with non-linear gameplay. GTA 3 was a pioneer in giving players a chance to fully interact with this open world and provide gameplay experiences outside of the main story. The world had many destructible features, and the world was roamable without needing to complete the main story at all. From then on, the world of open world would never be the same. Game companies began to tout open world as a feature to sell their game, and it worked. People loved the idea of being able to explore an open canvas of a map, interact with NPCs, and learn the world for themselves. People loved the lack of guidance and the exploration. You could head over to a random village in Skyrim and just pick up a quest. You could head over to an underground tomb in Assassin's Creed 2 and uncover hidden treasure. For the most part, the idea of open world is absolutely phenomenal, and it's something that has been picking up a ton of steam in the gaming world. It spilled into this idea that video games had to be as interactive and expressive of choice as possible. If the player could choose their path and their destiny within the realm of this strange and different world, then it creates some sort of mental connection to the game. The player becomes invested and will only want to spend more time within this particular game world. It curated this idea of interaction maximization because now with open worlds, if you're not interacting, you're not doing anything. And now we somehow seem to have gotten exhausted of open world games. Many are beginning to demand linear games again. Open world seems to just mean nothing nowadays. Just another way for game companies to market repetitive, oversaturated worlds that all seem to look the exact same. We seem to have a trend of game companies forgetting precisely what the idea of open world really means. Like most people who play video games regularly, I have been playing games labeled as open world for a long time. As a consumer and a player, I find myself drawn to all types of games, and I've played games across the entire spectrum, from shooters to fantasy RPGs to Metroidvanias to simulations, visual novels, and so on and so forth. Games are something that have become quite ingrained in my life. And as expected, the open world formula has become all but familiar to me. For me, open world or not, if a game is good, it's good. But my first true open world game that I fully engaged in, so to speak, was Assassin's Creed 2. When I first picked up Assassin's Creed 2 and popped it into my Xbox 360, I had absolutely no clue what to expect. I was anticipating a great game just based on what I'd heard about it, so when I was placed into the world of Renaissance Italy as Ezio, I knew that this game was gonna be amazing. And I was right. Assassin's Creed 2 was powerful, gripping, intense, beautiful, absolutely fantastic, all wrapped up in just an awesome experience. I would run around the map for hours on end, exploring all the synchronization points I can find and beating up NPCs and tossing coins and buying clothing dyes and wasting my money on weapons I knew I'd never touch and upgrading my armor and renovating stuff and wasting more money and playing the main story and playing the side quests and beating up more NPCs, and you get the idea. Assassin's Creed 2 for me was just perfect. That's what I could describe it as. So when I finished it, I quickly scoured for more open world games to fill that gap left behind by the end credits of Assassin's Creed 2. My first introduction to Far Cry was Far Cry 5, mostly because I'd never really thought I'd like Far Cry, but wow, was that game amazing. I would run around the map for hours on end, destroying random cult outposts, beating up cultists, saving NPCs, smacking deer with the random car I stole, shooting my way through any situation, interacting with NPCs, playing the main quest, wasting my money on random guns and on an American flag skin for my M4, and then I played Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and I would run around the map for hours on end, attacking random outposts, beating up soldiers, running away from gunfights I knew I had no chance of winning, LARPing as some mercenary, using a very American solution to all my problems, buying random outfits and helmets and wasting my money on that stuff, and so on and so forth. And then I believe you've started to notice the same pattern that I'm starting to notice here. Yeah, the Ubisoft pattern. Ubisoft, the French giant behind Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Ghost Recon, and Rainbow Six Siege, championed this idea of curating open worlds for every one of their game franchises. Ghost Recon wasn't always an open world third-person tactical shooter. That changed when Ghost Recon Wildlands released. And although Wildlands brought something new to the table in regards to open world third-person tactical gameplay, the problem came down to releasing Breakpoint with a very similar pattern of gameplay with a very similar open world. Sure, the map of Bolivia and Wildlands is better in my opinion, but what difference is there really when we break down the map beyond the visual exterior? The same quests and gameplay relatively copied itself over to Breakpoint, and I'm sure it'll be the same with the next Ghost Recon game. And by the way, I've played a lot of Ubisoft games, and I've enjoyed almost all of them for the most part. But at some point, the open world lost its charm. At some point, I just started playing the main story and foregoing all the extra stuff because I just didn't care. The open world formula that Ubisoft adopted seemed to come with little to no true value to the supposed rewards offered. In all fairness, if you removed all the elements of this so-called open world present in the game, you are left with a linear game wrapped in open world packaging. It's not a true open world, more so just a shell of an open world. It seems to understand that an open world requires interactivity and gameplay, but it really doesn't have varied interactivity and gameplay. The open world is simply a facade. Why are video games and not just something like movies? They're both entertainment products, right? But video games provide full interactivity, even if that particular video game has cutscenes. The idea is that when you boot up a video game, you are provided with a canvas to do as you please and enjoy the game from your perspective. Of course, linear games have a limitation in this regard, wherein a linear game forces you to move along a set path from A to B with little choice in the mix. Affordance-wise, open-world games afford this full immersive interactivity. You can move from A to Z and then to C and then E, and you'll still be able to follow along with the story. But what has affected this interactivity is the formulaic approach that many game studios have fallen victim to. Ubisoft, I would say, is the best example of a studio that has fallen victim to the formulaic open world. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a perfect example of one such open world game. Valhalla itself is relatively the same across all hours of playtime. If I were to break it down to its basic components, AC Valhalla relatively looks like this. You must gain the trust of Region X. You go to Region X. You undertake several missions in your goal to gain the trust of Region X. You gain the trust of Region X. And then on to the next region. But by then you've already sunk hours upon hours of the same thing, and to what end? And if you think to play some of the side quests to level up, you'll find yourself playing through mainly meaningless things, and eventually you're just fed up with this repetitive formula. Ubisoft is not the only studio to repeat these formulaic methods of open-world gameplay. Other games such as Horizon Zero Dawn and recently released open-world games all start to feel like they fall in line with this formulaic approach that Ubisoft now exploits to no end. And Ubisoft did not stop with Assassin's Creed. It applied the same formula across all of its open world titles, and it continues to do so. Sure, one could argue in relative terms that each game on its own stands well, but collectively placing them together, especially when they are within a singular franchise, is where you start to notice an implicative problem. The secondary part of this issue is that game studios can claim that their titles take up to 300 hours to complete, if not more, and then it's just the same copy-paste content for an entire 300 hours. It simply affords these studios the ability to claim that their game is riddled with inspiring, in-depth content when reality displays the opposite of such claims. Elden Ring is an example of a game that perfected an open world, despite not being as intensely sprawling as other open world games like Far Cry 6. Elden Ring is quite truly an open world arena for you to explore and learn from. Your character's existence in Elden Ring is given brief and limited guidance, and for the most part, you're on your own to understand how the world of Elden Ring works. The game world itself seems to have been similarly designed to a canvas. You provide your own path to the game, and the game responds to the path that you attempt to forge. You are not told to go to point A, and then to point B, and then to point C, and so on and so forth. The bosses are not all the same exact thing. You are not going to face the same situation in every area you enter when it comes to Elden Ring. Instead, what you start to notice is that each interaction is a new learning experience. Elden Ring seems to toss out these unspoken rules of the open world game where you are the hero that must save the day. Elden Ring pitches you in a bleak, destroyed world where, quite literally, all hope is lost. Now go and forge a path to find the Elden Ring. That's the idea. It's hopeless. Just survive and learn to keep surviving, and so on. Skyrim also benefits from its open world in that Skyrim provides for the player a relatively decent amount of choice in both player life and player actions. If you want to be evil, you can certainly perform actions that make you evil. If you want to be good, you can. Skyrim provides for you a fantastical, epic world wherein you are a character of your choice that can adjust the trajectory of your life throughout this game. Skyrim perfected the idea of the fantasy RPG in that it curated a proper RPG experience for the player while still remaining in an open world. But this open world does not copy-paste barren space. There are fantastical structures, explorable areas, new NPCs, stories to listen and learn from, careers to undertake. Skyrim is a very living world, and with its modability, it can become even better. Linear games like Rise Son of Rome, Call of Duty's campaigns, Doom, and more, these games are set in one path. You start at point A with the goal to reach point Z without anything else interjecting along the way. Sure, some parts of the path you take may include collectibles, or some sort of external interactivity beyond the story, but for the most part you are constrained to the limits within the zone you are set to be playing in. You are simply following the story. You are not forging your own path within the story or within the game world. This sort of limitation is not actually a problem though. Linear games with a set plotline where you are simply following along the story of the game afford a sort of emotional connection through the concept of story and narrative. Take a game such as A Plague Tale: Innocence, with a story of survival at its core. You are not the one experiencing the situations that Amicia and Hugo face, but the ability of the writers to delve into the fear that an older sister faces when trying to protect her younger brother, as well as the idea of sticking together as a family through the worst of times. These sorts of things appeal to the mind of a person playing the game. They tap into the emotions that lie inside our brains. You don't need to be in total control of the world and the character in order to connect with the character. And the same can be said for most linear games. These games are clever in their use of narrative, which I think is essential for these sorts of games. And that yearning for a set narrative seems to be growing among players all over. Open world seems to be losing its flair because that sort of emotional connection is lacking in place of an empty map that just has extra pixel footage. What we get from this is that it's not about the idea of open world or a lack thereof. It's about the ability of the game designer and the game writer to bend the direction taken in order to curate a connection with the player behind the screen. Meaningless open worlds are pointless because they do nothing for the player. The world becomes a burden, and it becomes a thing that is undesirable to explore further. You simply start going from point A to B as you would in a linear game because there is nothing compelling around you. What formulaic open worlds have done is numb us to the flair and charm of open worlds, and have instead transformed such open worlds into open burdens for us to contend with. And as players, games are a source of entertainment. If there is no entertainment value, then the entertainment product is meaningless to our lives. So if you find yourself tired of the idea of open world games, it's not just because it's an open world. Rather, it's what that open world offers you. And if it offers you minimal enjoyment, it's as good as non-existent. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Comment below what your thoughts are on the ideas of open world games nowadays and leave a like on this video. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that, as well as all of our other links, are in the description below.